Welcome to a new story, one that will keep you on the edge of your seat from start to finish. Imagine coming home after a long, exhausting day, only to find your world turned upside down in an instant. What would you do if the person you trusted most was hiding secrets that could destroy everything you hold dear? In today's tale, we follow Dr. Emily Carter, a woman whose life takes a shocking turn after an unexpected discovery. What she finds will lead her down a path of betrayal, danger, and a truth far more sinister than she ever imagined. Stay with us as we unravel this gripping story, full of twists and turns that will leave you guessing until the very end. Sit back, relax, and let the story begin. Dr. Emily Carter couldn't shake the fatigue clinging to her bones as she pulled into the driveway of her suburban home. After a grueling 24-hour shift at the hospital, all she wanted was a hot shower and to curl up next to her husband, David. As she stepped inside, the house was unusually quiet. The usual hum of the TV or the soft sound of David's voice on a phone call was absent. Odd, she thought, but didn't dwell on it as she set down her bag and headed upstairs. Halfway up the stairs, she heard muffled voices. Confused, Emily paused, her heart beginning to race for reasons she couldn't quite understand. The voices grew clearer, more intimate, as she reached the bedroom door, which was slightly ajar. She pushed it open cautiously, and what she saw made her world collapse in an instant. David, the man she had loved and trusted for a decade, was in bed with another woman. The sight was so surreal that for a moment, Emily thought she might be dreaming. But the reality hit her like a freight train as David's shocked eyes met hers, his expression a mix of guilt and fear. What is this?" Emily's voice trembled, barely above a whisper, as she struggled to process the scene in front of her. The woman in bed scrambled to cover herself, but Emily's gaze was locked on David, waiting for an explanation that could somehow make sense of this betrayal. "Emily, I didn't expect you home so early," David stammered, sitting up, the sheets clutched to his chest. He looked as though he was searching for words, but none came that could undo the damage of what she had just witnessed. Emily felt a wave of nausea rise, her heart pounding in her ears. Without another word, she turned and fled the room, her feet moving on autopilot as she descended the stairs and out the front door. She needed to breathe, to escape the nightmare her life had just become. Reaching her car, Emily sat in the driver's seat, her hands trembling as she gripped the steering wheel. The tears came then, hot and unchecked, as the reality of what she had seen began to sink in. Her mind raced with questions, each more painful than the last. How long had this been going on? Who was that woman? And more importantly, why? Without thinking, she started the car and drove, not knowing where she was headed, only that she needed to get away. Eventually, she found herself at the Café Central, a place she often went to unwind after a tough day. But today, it was more than just the stress of work that weighed her down. She ordered a coffee and sat in the corner, staring blankly at the cup in front of her. It wasn't long before Bob, her mentor and friend, noticed her from across the room. His usual cheerful expression faded as he approached her table, sensing something was terribly wrong. "Emily, what happened?" he asked gently, sitting across from her. The words tumbled out in a rush, as she recounted what she had just witnessed. Bob listened, his face growing more serious with every detail. When she finished, he reached out, placing a comforting hand on hers. "Emily, you don't have to go back there tonight. You can stay with me until you figure out what to do," Bob offered. Emily shook her head. "I need answers, Bob. I can't just walk away without knowing why he did this." Bob nodded, understanding the fire that had sparked in her eyes. "Then get your answers, but be careful, Emily. This might be just the beginning of something much bigger." The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she knew he was right. She couldn't let this betrayal break her, not without understanding the full truth behind it. As she left the cafe, A new resolve took hold. She was going to confront David again, and this time she wouldn't leave without the truth. The house was eerily silent as Emily stepped through the front door, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and dread. The earlier confrontation with David replayed in her mind, but now, as she stood in the dimly lit hallway, she felt a surge of determination. She wouldn't let this betrayal slide without understanding the full scope of what had been happening behind her back. David was in the living room, sitting on the couch with his head in his hands. The sight of him there, looking so defeated, might have softened her resolve on another day, but not now. Not after what she had seen. "David, we need to talk," Emily said firmly, crossing her arms as she stood in front of him. Her voice was steady, though her heart was racing. He looked up at her, his eyes red-rimmed. "Emily, I'm sorry. I never wanted you to find out like this." "Find out what, David?" she demanded. "That you've been sleeping with someone else? How long has this been going on?" David hesitated, and that pause told her everything she needed to know. "A few months," he admitted, his voice barely audible. "A few months," she echoed, the words like acid on her tongue. "And you didn't think to tell me? To come clean before it got to this point?" "I didn't know how, Emily. I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, it's a little late for that, don't you think?" she shot back, her anger flaring. "Why, David? Why would you do this?" David sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if trying to ease the guilt that weighed on him. "It's not as simple as it seems," he started, but the words felt hollow. "Work has been stressful, and I've been feeling lost. When I met Lisa, it was like an escape." Emily's breath caught. Lisa. Now the faceless woman in her mind had a name. It somehow made the betrayal even more real, more tangible. "An escape," Emily repeated, her voice thick with disbelief. "You risked everything we've built for an escape?" David looked up at her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite place. Fear, regret, or maybe both. "It wasn't just about the affair, Emily. I've made some bad decisions, ones that have put us both in danger." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What kind of decisions?" He hesitated again, and she could see the conflict in his eyes, the battle between telling her the truth and keeping her in the dark. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm in debt, Emily. Serious debt. And it's not just money. There are people involved. Dangerous people." The room seemed to close in around her as the implications of his words sank in. This was far worse than she had imagined. Her mind raced, trying to piece together how the man she had trusted could have gotten himself, and by extension her, into such a dangerous situation. "What kind of people, David?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "People who won't hesitate to come after us if I don't pay them back," he confessed, his voice trembling. "I thought I could handle it, but it's spiraled out of control. And now you've put us both in danger," Emily finished for him, her voice cold. "Is that why you turned to Lisa? Did she offer you some kind of way out?" David looked down, unable to meet her gaze. She's connected to them. I thought I could use her to negotiate, to buy more time." Emily felt a wave of nausea. The betrayal was one thing, but to know that her husband had entangled her life with dangerous criminals, all while hiding it behind a facade of normalcy, was almost too much to bear. She turned away from him, needing a moment to gather her thoughts. The man she had married, the man she had built a life with, was a stranger to her now. She had to be smart, careful. This wasn't just about a broken marriage anymore. It was about survival. When she finally spoke, her voice was filled with a new resolve. "You need to tell me everything, David. No more lies. If you want any chance of fixing this, of fixing us, you need to be honest." David nodded, the fear in his eyes unmistakable. "I will, Emily. I promise." But as he began to speak, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker journey. Emily stared at the documents spread across the kitchen table, her mind reeling from everything David had just confessed. Pages filled with financial statements, letters from creditors, and contracts with names she didn't recognize. This was her husband's secret life, laid bare before her. The deeper she dug, the more her heart sank. The debt was staggering, but it was the names, the connections to people she knew were involved in criminal activities, that terrified her the most. She couldn't handle this alone. Despite the anger and betrayal she felt, Emily knew she needed to protect herself. She needed a plan, and she needed it fast. The next morning, she called a lawyer, an old friend she trusted implicitly. Meeting him in his office, she explained the situation in as much detail as she could without incriminating David more than necessary. The lawyer, a man named Peter, listened carefully, his expression growing more serious with each revelation. "Emily, this is serious," Peter said, leaning forward. "You need to think about your safety first. We can start with legal separation, freeze your joint accounts, and file for a restraining order if necessary." Emily shook her head, though she appreciated Peter's concern. "I'm not ready to go that far, Peter. I need to understand the full picture first. I need to know how deep this goes." Peter sighed, clearly worried. "Just be careful, Emily. This isn't something you can handle alone." She nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead, considering her next move. She thanked Peter and left his office with more questions than answers. Later that day, Emily found herself at the Café Central again, her usual refuge now tainted by the memories of the last few days. She was sitting by the window, sipping her coffee and trying to think when the door opened, and Lisa walked in. Emily stiffened, watching as Lisa scanned the room before spotting her. For a moment, Emily considered leaving, but something in Lisa's expression stopped her. It wasn't the smugness she had expected. Instead, Lisa looked scared. "Emily," Lisa said quietly as she approached the table, "can we talk?" Emily didn't respond immediately, but after a moment, she gestured to the seat across from her. Lisa sat down, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her cup. "I'm not here to cause more trouble," Lisa began, her voice barely above a whisper. I think you need to know that David isn't the only one in danger." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Lisa glanced around nervously, lowering her voice further. "The people David's involved with. They're ruthless. They don't care who gets hurt as long as they get what they want. And now, because of me, they know about you." Emily's blood ran cold. "What do you mean they know about me?" "I didn't realize how deep he was in," Lisa admitted, her eyes pleading. "But when they found out about you, they saw you as leverage. They think they can use you to get to him." Emily felt a surge of panic, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because they're watching me too," Lisa confessed. "And I don't know who else to turn to. I never meant for it to get this far, but now, I'm in over my head." For a moment, Emily considered the irony of the situation, sitting across from the woman who had helped destroy her marriage, now facing a common enemy. But this wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. It was about survival. "What do you want from me?" Emily asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. Lisa looked down at her cup, her voice trembling as she spoke. "We need to work together. If we don't, they'll destroy us both." Emily studied Lisa's face, searching for any sign of deception. But all she saw was genuine fear, fear that mirrored her own. She knew that, despite everything, Lisa was right. Alone, they were vulnerable. Together, they might stand a chance. "All right," Emily said slowly. "But if we're going to do this, we do it my way. No more lies, no more secrets. Understood?" Lisa nodded, relief washing over her face. Understood. As they began to discuss their plan, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of what they were up against. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined, and the danger more real. But if there was one thing she knew, it was that she wouldn't go down without a fight. Emily packed a small suitcase, her hands trembling as she threw in the essentials: clothes, toiletries, her most important documents. The house that once felt like a safe haven now seemed foreign, every corner filled with memories that felt distant and tainted. David was out, meeting with his so-called business associates, giving her the time she needed to put her plan into action. Bob had insisted she stay at his place for a while, and though she hated to impose, she knew she had no other choice. She couldn't stay here, not knowing who might be watching her, waiting for the right moment to strike. She glanced around the bedroom one last time before heading downstairs. As she approached the door, her heart pounded in her chest. This was it. There was no turning back. She was leaving the life she had known behind, stepping into a world filled with uncertainty and danger. But she wasn't the same woman who had walked into this house just a few days ago. She was stronger now, more determined. Just as she reached for the doorknob, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated before answering, her breath catching as she saw the caller ID. David. "Emily." His voice came through the line, strained and tense. "Where are you?" Emily forced herself to stay calm. "I'm out, just running some errands." "Come home," David said, the urgency in his voice sending a chill down her spine. "We need to talk." She knew better than to trust him now. "I'm busy, David. We can talk later." "No, Emily," he insisted, his tone shifting from urgent to desperate. "You need to come home. Now." Emily's grip tightened on the phone as she tried to think of a response. Something in his voice told her this wasn't just about their marriage anymore. It was about something far more dangerous. "David, what's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. There was a pause on the other end, and for a moment, she thought he might hang up. But then he spoke, his voice low and almost pleading. "Emily, I made a mistake. I got involved with the wrong people, and now they're coming for us. I don't know what to do." Her heart raced as the implications of his words sank in. She knew she couldn't trust him completely, but the fear in his voice was real. Whatever he had done, it had spiraled out of control, and now they were both caught in the middle. "I can't come home right now," Emily said, her voice firm despite the fear coursing through her. "But I'll meet you somewhere safe. We can figure this out together." David hesitated, clearly conflicted. "All right. There's a motel on the edge of town, the Riverview. Meet me there in an hour." Emily agreed, ending the call with a sense of dread. She couldn't be sure if this was a trap or if David was truly desperate. Either way, she needed to be prepared. She grabbed her bag and headed out the door, her mind racing as she drove to Bob's house. She would drop off her things there before meeting David. But as she drove, something in her gut told her that this meeting could be a turning point, either the moment they began to unravel the mess David had created or the moment everything fell apart. When she arrived at Bob's, he was waiting at the door, his expression filled with concern. "Emily, what's going on?" She quickly filled him in on the call with David, watching as Bob's frown deepened with every word. "This doesn't sound good, Emily. You shouldn't go alone." "I don't have a choice," she replied. "But I'll be careful. I need to know what's really going on, and this might be my only chance." Bob nodded, though his worry was evident. "Just promise me you'll call if something feels off. Don't take any unnecessary risks." Emily smiled faintly, touched by his concern. "I promise." With that, she left Bob's house, her heart pounding as she drove toward the Riverview Motel. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road as she approached the outskirts of town. As the motel came into view, a sense of foreboding settled over her, but she pushed it aside. She had to stay focused, had to be ready for whatever was about to happen. She pulled into the parking lot, scanning the area for any sign of David. The motel was run down, with flickering neon lights and a handful of cars parked haphazardly. Taking a deep breath, Emily stepped out of the car and headed toward the room number David had given her. But just as she reached the door, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. Emily's blood ran cold as she read the words. "Don't trust him. Get out now, before it's too late." Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around, suddenly aware of how exposed she was. The message was clear, but the sender was unknown. She was faced with an impossible choice: trust David and step into the unknown, or follow the warning and walk away, possibly missing the chance to uncover the truth. The decision weighed heavily on her as she stood there, the night closing in around her. Whatever she chose, there was no turning back. Emily's hand hovered over the doorknob, the anonymous warning replaying in her mind. Every instinct told her to turn around and leave, but the need for answers, for closure, kept her rooted in place. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and pushed the door open. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering lamp in the corner. David was sitting on the edge of the bed, his face pale and drawn, a far cry from the confident man she once knew. He looked up as she entered, relief flashing across his features, but there was something else in his eyes, fear and perhaps a touch of regret. "Emily," he breathed, standing up as she closed the door behind her. "Thank God you came." She kept her distance, her back pressed against the door. "You said we needed to talk. So talk." David swallowed, his hands trembling slightly as he ran them through his hair. I don't even know where to start." "Try starting with the truth," Emily replied coldly. "Something you've been avoiding for a long time." He flinched at her words, but nodded, sinking back onto the bed. "You're right. I've made a mess of everything, and now it's all falling apart. The people I owe. They're not just creditors, Emily. They're dangerous men, and they're running out of patience." Emily crossed her arms, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "And what does Lisa have to do with this?" David hesitated, his eyes dropping to the floor. "She was supposed to help me. She has connections, people who could negotiate with them, maybe buy me some time. But it didn't work. They found out, and now they're using her to get to me, to get to us." Emily felt a surge of anger mixed with pity. "And you thought dragging me into this mess was the solution?" "No," he said quickly, desperation creeping into his voice. "I didn't want to involve you, but they found out about you. I think Lisa might have mentioned you. I don't know, but now they're threatening to hurt you if I don't pay up." Emily's mind raced as she processed his words. The warning she received could have come from anyone, but the timing suggested it was someone close to the situation. Maybe even Lisa herself, though Emily couldn't be sure. She needed more information, and fast. "How much do you owe them?" she asked, her tone sharp. David looked up, his eyes filled with shame. 200,000. And that's just the start. With interest. It's more than we could ever afford. Emily's heart sank. The amount was staggering, but it wasn't just the money that worried her. It was the implications. The life they had built together was crumbling, and now she was entangled in a web of deceit and danger she hadn't even known existed. "You need to go to the police, David," Emily said, her voice firm. "They can help protect us, but you have to be honest with them. David shook his head violently. You don't understand. These people, they have connections everywhere. The police won't help us. They might even be involved. If I go to them, we're as good as dead. Emily stared at him, her fear mixing with frustration. She knew he was right to some extent, but staying silent wasn't an option either. So what do we do? Run? David looked up at her, his expression desperate. That's what I've been thinking. We leave town, disappear for a while, until I can figure out how to fix this. Emily felt a pang of dread. Running wouldn't solve anything. It would only delay the inevitable. But what other choice did they have? The thought of abandoning her life, her career, everything she had worked for, was terrifying, yet staying seemed equally impossible. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again, another message from the unknown number. You don't have much time. Leave now, or they'll find you both. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she read the message. This was it, their last chance to escape before everything came crashing down. She looked at David, who was watching her with a mixture of hope and fear. Someone's been sending me warnings, she said slowly, showing him the message. Whoever it is, they're telling me to leave. Now. David's eyes widened, panic flickering across his face. Then we need to go. Right now. Emily hesitated, torn between the urge to flee and the need to uncover the truth. But as the seconds ticked by, she realized she didn't have time to make a perfect decision. Survival was all that mattered. All right, she said finally. But we do this my way. No more secrets. David nodded, grabbing his bag from the floor. Agreed. Together, they left the motel, the night closing in around them as they headed toward the unknown. Emily's mind raced with the possibilities. Who was helping them, who was after them, and what they would do next. But one thing was clear. This was only the beginning, and the danger was far from over. The road stretched endlessly before them, illuminated only by the car's headlights slicing through the darkness. Emily gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white as she focused on the empty highway. David sat beside her, silent, lost in his thoughts. The tension in the car was palpable, each of them wrestling with the fear and uncertainty of what lay ahead. They had been driving for hours, putting as much distance between them and their past as possible. But no matter how far they went, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed, that danger lurked just out of sight. We can't keep running forever, Emily finally said, breaking the heavy silence. Her voice was calm, but inside, she was a whirlwind of emotions. Fear, anger, and a desperate need for answers. I know, David replied, his voice weary. But what choice do we have? Going back is out of the question. Emily glanced at him, the strain of the last few days etched into every line of his face. He looked older, more fragile, and it pained her to see him this way. But she couldn't let herself soften. Not now, not when so much was at stake. There has to be another way, she insisted. We need to find out who sent those messages. If they're trying to help us, maybe they know something we don't. David nodded slowly, though the doubt in his eyes was clear. But how do we find them? We don't even know who they are. Emily considered this for a moment, her mind racing. The messages had been cryptic, but there was something about them, something that made her think the sender was closer than they realized. Maybe they'll contact us again, she said. But until then, we need to stay off the radar. No credit cards, no phones, nothing that can trace us. David agreed, and they drove in silence for a while longer, each lost in their own thoughts. The weight of their situation pressed down on them, the reality of their choices settling in. They were fugitives now, running from a danger they barely understood. Eventually, they pulled into a small, run-down motel on the outskirts of a sleepy town. The neon sign flickered weakly, casting a pale glow over the deserted parking lot. It was the kind of place where people went to disappear, and for now, that was exactly what they needed. Inside the room, Emily set her bag down and sank onto the edge of the bed. The exhaustion hit her all at once, the adrenaline that had kept her going finally wearing off. But there was no time to rest, not when their future was so uncertain. David paced the small room, his anxiety evident in every step. What if they find us here? What if? They won't, Emily interrupted, her voice firm. Not if we're careful. He stopped pacing and looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and despair. I'm sorry, Emily, for everything. I never wanted to drag you into this. Emily sighed, the anger and hurt bubbling up inside her. I know, David. But we're in this together now. We have to figure out a way to fix it. David sat down beside her, his shoulders slumped. I don't know if we can. Emily looked at him, her resolve hardening. We have to try. The room fell silent again, the weight of their situation hanging heavy in the air. Emily's mind raced with possibilities, with plans and contingencies, but every scenario seemed to lead them back to the same place, the edge of a precipice, with no clear way forward. Just as the silence became unbearable, Emily's phone buzzed. She hesitated, fear clutching at her heart, but when she saw the number, she quickly answered. Hello. There was a pause on the other end, and then a familiar voice spoke, low and urgent. Emily, it's Lisa. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Lisa? How did you get this number? I've been trying to reach you, Lisa replied, her voice trembling. You're in danger, Emily. They know where you are. Panic surged through Emily, her heart pounding in her chest. How do you know that? Because they're after me too, Lisa admitted, her voice breaking. I've been trying to stay ahead of them, but they're closing in. We don't have much time. Emily exchanged a quick glance with David, who was listening intently. What do we do? There's a place, Lisa said quickly, her voice barely a whisper. A cabin, about an hour from here. It's off the grid, safe. We can meet there and figure out our next move. Emily hesitated. Trusting Lisa felt like a risk, but she knew they had no other options. All right. Send me the location. Lisa agreed, and after a brief pause she added, Emily, be careful. These people, they're ruthless. Don't trust anyone. The call ended, and Emily stared at the phone, her mind spinning. This was it, their last chance to stay ahead of the danger that was closing in around them. She turned to David, who was already on his feet, ready to leave. We need to move, she said, her voice steady. We're meeting Lisa at a safe house. But we can't let our guard down. Not for a second. David nodded, his expression grim. Let's go. They left the motel room, the night air cool and filled with the scent of rain. As they drove into the darkness, the road ahead seemed more uncertain than ever. But one thing was clear. They were in this together, and they would fight to survive, no matter the cost. The rain had started to fall, a light drizzle that coated the windshield as they drove through the winding back roads. The world outside was shrouded in darkness, the trees looming like silent sentinels as they made their way toward the cabin. Emily kept her eyes on the road, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Next to her, David was tense, his fingers drumming nervously on his knee. The directions Lisa had sent were precise, leading them deeper into the wilderness, away from any sign of civilization. As they rounded the final bend, the cabin came into view, a small, weathered structure nestled among the trees, its windows dark and uninviting. It looked like it hadn't seen visitors in years, which made it the perfect place to hide. Emily parked the car and turned off the engine, the sudden silence pressing down on them. They sat there for a moment, neither of them moving, the weight of the situation hanging heavy between them. "Are you sure about this?" David asked quietly, his voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. Emily hesitated, her fingers gripping the steering wheel. "No, but we don't have a choice." They got out of the car, the cold rain soaking through their clothes as they hurried toward the cabin. The door was unlocked, and when they stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and dampness greeted them. The interior was sparse, with only a few pieces of worn furniture and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. Emily set her bag down and looked around, her nerves on edge. The cabin was isolated, yes, but it was also vulnerable. If someone wanted to find them, this place wouldn't hold up for long. "Lisa should be here soon," Emily said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We'll figure out our next move when she arrives." David nodded, though he looked far from reassured. "I just hope she knows what she's doing." Emily didn't respond, her thoughts too focused on the uncertainty of what lay ahead. They were out of options, and their trust in Lisa was a fragile lifeline. They didn't have to wait long. The sound of a car approaching broke the tense silence, and Emily's heart leaped into her throat. She moved to the window, peering out into the rain-soaked night. A vehicle pulled up next to theirs, and she watched as Lisa stepped out, her figure barely visible in the downpour. A moment later, Lisa was at the door, dripping wet and shivering from the cold. Emily opened it quickly, ushering her inside. Lisa looked pale and exhausted, her eyes wide with fear. "Did anyone follow you?" Emily asked immediately, closing the door behind her. Lisa shook her head, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "No, I made sure of it. But we don't have much time. They're getting closer." Emily exchanged a worried glance with David. "What do they want, Lisa? Why are they after us?" Lisa hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for the right words. "It's not just about the money, Emily. It's about control. They want to own you, to use you as leverage against David, and they'll stop at nothing to get what they want." David clenched his fists, his anger boiling over. "This is all my fault. I should have never gotten involved with them." "It's too late for regrets," Lisa said sharply, her voice trembling. "We need to focus on staying alive." Emily nodded, though her mind was spinning. The situation was far more dangerous than she had realized. They were up against people who had no boundaries, no morals, only a relentless drive to get what they wanted. "We need a plan," Emily said, her voice firm. "Something that will buy us more time, or at least give us a chance to escape." Lisa nodded, though her expression was grim. "There's one thing we can do, but it's risky." Emily's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Lisa took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "We turn the tables on them. We make them believe we have something they want, something even more valuable than what David owes." Emily frowned, uncertainty gnawing at her. "But what could that be? What do we have that they don't?" Lisa's eyes darkened, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Information. Secrets they don't want anyone to know. If we can convince them that we have dirt on them, something that could destroy them, they might back off." David looked doubtful. "And how do we do that?" Lisa pulled a small flash drive from her pocket, holding it up. "With this. It's not much, but it's enough to make them nervous. We use it to negotiate, to buy ourselves time." Emily stared at the flash drive, the weight of their predicament settling heavily on her shoulders. It was a dangerous gamble, but it might be their only chance. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady. "We'll do it. But we have to be smart about it. One wrong move, and it's over." Lisa nodded, slipping the flash drive back into her pocket. "We'll contact them in the morning. For now, We need to rest and be ready for whatever comes next." As the three of them settled in for the night, the tension in the cabin was almost suffocating. The storm outside raged on, mirroring the turmoil inside. Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with plans and contingencies. They were playing a dangerous game, and the stakes couldn't be higher. But if there was one thing she knew, it was that she wouldn't let them go down without a fight. The morning arrived with a thick fog that clung to the trees outside the cabin, casting an eerie silence over the world. Emily woke with a start, her mind immediately alert to the dangers that lay ahead. She sat up in the creaky bed, her thoughts still tangled with the events of the night before. They had a plan, but it was risky, and she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a fine line between survival and disaster. David was already awake, pacing near the window, his face drawn with worry. Lisa was in the small kitchen, making coffee, her movements quick and tense. The atmosphere in the cabin was heavy with unspoken fears and the weight of what they were about to do. As Emily joined them, Lisa handed her a cup of coffee, her eyes serious. "We need to be ready. Once we make contact, there's no turning back." Emily nodded, taking a sip of the bitter coffee. It did little to calm her nerves, but she knew they had no other choice. They were out of time, and out of options. Lisa pulled out her phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing a number. She put the call on speaker, and they all held their breath as it rang, the sound loud in the quiet cabin. Finally, someone picked up. "What do you want?" The voice on the other end was cold, devoid of any emotion. Lisa exchanged a glance with Emily before responding. "We have something you want. Information that could ruin everything you've built. If you want it, you'll meet us, alone." There was a pause, the silence stretching out unbearably. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each second feeling like an eternity. Finally, the voice replied, "Where?" Lisa quickly gave them the location, a secluded spot in the woods a few miles from the cabin. It was a place they had scouted the night before, knowing it would give them the advantage of cover and escape routes if needed. "Be there in 2 hours," the voice said before the line went dead. Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. "Do you think they'll come?" "They'll come," Lisa replied, her voice steady. "But we need to be ready for anything." The next 2 hours passed in a blur as they prepared for the meeting. Emily's mind raced with 1,000 scenarios, each more dangerous than the last. They had to play this perfectly, or everything would fall apart. When the time came, they left the cabin, the tension thick in the air as they drove to the meeting spot. The fog still hung low, adding an extra layer of unease to the already tense situation. Emily parked the car at the edge of the clearing, her senses on high alert as they stepped out and made their way into the woods. The spot they had chosen was isolated, surrounded by tall trees and thick underbrush. It was the perfect place for an ambush, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But they had no other choice. They waited in silence, each of them scanning the area for any sign of movement. The minutes ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Finally, they heard the crunch of gravel underfoot, and a figure emerged from the mist. Emily's heart leaped into her throat as she recognized the man approaching them. He was tall, with a sharp, angular face and cold, calculating eyes. He moved with a confidence that sent a shiver down her spine. He stopped a few feet away from them, his gaze sweeping over each of them before settling on Lisa. "You have something for me?" Lisa nodded, pulling the flash drive from her pocket. "It's all here. Everything you've tried to hide. If this gets out, you're finished." The man smirked, his eyes narrowing as he looked at the flash drive. "And what do you want in return?" "Leave us alone," Lisa replied, her voice firm. "Erase the debt, walk away, and never come after us again." The man laughed, a cold, cruel sound that made Emily's skin crawl. You think it's that simple? You think I'm just going to walk away because you have a few files on a flash drive? Emily stepped forward, her heart pounding. You don't have a choice. If anything happens to us, this information gets released. You'll lose everything. The man's smile faded, his eyes turning icy. You're bluffing. Emily held his gaze, her voice steady. Try me. For a moment, they stood there, the tension crackling in the air between them. Emily's breath caught as she waited for his response, her entire body tense with anticipation. Finally, the man nodded slowly, a grudging respect in his eyes. All right. You win this round. But don't think this is over. You'll never be safe, no matter where you run. With that, he turned and disappeared back into the mist, leaving them standing there, their hearts pounding in their chests. As soon as he was out of sight, Emily let out a shaky breath, her legs trembling with the adrenaline. They had done it. They had survived, for now. We need to go, Lisa said quickly, already turning to head back to the car. We can't stay here. They'll be watching us. Emily and David followed her, their relief quickly replaced by the sobering realization that their fight was far from over. They had won a battle, but the war was still raging, and they were still very much in danger. As they drove away from the meeting spot, the fog slowly lifting, Emily couldn't help but wonder what the future held. They were on the run, caught in a web of lies and danger, with no clear path forward. But one thing was certain: they wouldn't give up. Not now. Not ever. The drive back to the cabin was filled with a heavy silence, each of them lost in their thoughts. The encounter had shaken them, but it had also given them a fleeting sense of victory. Still, Emily knew that this was far from over. The man's parting words echoed in her mind. You'll never be safe. Back at the cabin, they gathered around the small table, their faces drawn with exhaustion and fear. The adrenaline that had fueled them was beginning to wear off, leaving behind the cold reality of their situation. We need a new plan, Lisa said, breaking the silence. They won't stop until they get what they want. Emily nodded, her mind racing. We can't keep running. We have to find a way to end this, once and for all. David looked up, a grim determination in his eyes. There's only one way to do that. We need to expose them, publicly. Make sure the truth gets out so they can't silence us. But how? Emily asked, her voice tinged with desperation. They have connections everywhere. Even if we go to the authorities, there's no guarantee they'll protect us. Lisa leaned forward, her voice steady. We need to find someone we can trust. Someone with enough power and influence to take them down. Emily frowned, considering their options. It was a dangerous gamble, but it might be their only chance. They had to find someone who wasn't corrupt, someone who could stand up to these people and expose their crimes. There's a journalist, Emily said slowly, the idea forming in her mind. A friend of mine from college. She's been investigating corruption in the city for years. If anyone can help us, it's her. Lisa looked at her, hope flickering in her eyes. Do you think she'd be willing to take the risk? Emily nodded. If we can give her solid evidence, she'll run with it. But we have to be careful. If they find out what we're planning, they'll come after us with everything they have. David agreed, his voice resolute. Then we move quickly. We can't afford to wait. The next few hours were a blur of preparation. They gathered everything they had: documents, recordings, the flash drive, anything that could help build their case. Emily reached out to her journalist friend, setting up a secret meeting. The risk was enormous, but they knew it was their only shot at escaping the nightmare that had taken over their lives. That evening, as the sun began to set, they left the cabin for the last time. The drive into the city was tense, every car that passed them feeling like a potential threat. But they made it to the meeting spot without incident, a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Emily's friend, Sarah, was already waiting for them, her sharp eyes scanning the room as they approached. She stood as they reached the table, greeting Emily with a tight hug. "It's good to see you, but I wish it were under different circumstances," Sarah said, her voice laced with concern. Emily nodded, her heart heavy. "I know. But we need your help, Sarah. This is bigger than anything we've ever faced." Sarah listened intently as they laid out the evidence, her expression growing more serious with each passing moment. When they finished, she sat back, her mind clearly working through the implications. "This is explosive," Sarah finally said, her voice low. "If we publish this, it'll bring down some very powerful people. But it also puts all of you in even greater danger." "We know," Emily replied, her voice steady. "But it's the only way. We can't keep running." Sarah nodded, her decision made. "All right, I'll do it. But you need to go somewhere safe, somewhere they can't find you." "We'll figure something out," Lisa said, though the uncertainty in her voice was clear. They handed over the evidence, and Sarah promised to contact them once the story was ready to go live. As they left the cafe, the weight of what they had done settled over them. It was a dangerous move, but it was their only hope of breaking free from the nightmare. For the next few days, they stayed in a series of safe houses, moving constantly to avoid detection. The tension was unbearable, every knock on the door or ring of the phone sending their hearts racing. But they held on, knowing that the truth was about to be revealed. Finally, the day came. Sarah's story broke, sending shockwaves through the city. The headlines were explosive, exposing a web of corruption, blackmail, and criminal activities that reached the highest levels of power. The people who had hunted them were now on the defensive, scrambling to cover their tracks. Emily, David, and Lisa watched the news from a small, remote cabin, their hearts pounding as the story unfolded. It wasn't over yet, but they had struck a devastating blow to their enemies. The tide was turning in their favor. In the days that followed, arrests were made, and the network of corruption began to unravel. Emily's life would never be the same, but she knew she had done the right thing. They had faced down a nightmare and survived. As the dust began to settle, Emily knew they would have to start over, rebuild their lives from the ground up. But they were free now, and that was what mattered most. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were no longer running. They had their lives back, and for the first time in a long time, they could breathe again. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment with a number from 1 to 5 to let us know how much you like the story. Also watch the video that is currently on your screen. See you soon.